Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe Illustrated. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and this is the podcast of Joe on Joe, where we go through every issue of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, the comic book, page by page, panel by panel, and discuss it. Do it a breakdown style. Like, really give it the kind of attention that every single issue deserves, because it took these guys many hours to make, so we can certainly give it a half hour to break. Ooh, that's a nice slogan. I literally just thought of that. Took so long to make, we can give it a half hour to break. We'll see if that catches on, kids. So if you guys are regular listeners, you know that last week we did issue number 61. And G.I. Joe 61 is infamous, nefarious for originally being drawn by Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane, his version of it was rejected by somebody, whether it was Larry or the editors or whomever. But they said it didn't really match what they wanted. And so we covered in depth our episode last week. I urge you guys all to, on your various podcatchers, go back and listen to last week's if you have not heard this week's. And it was replaced by Marshall Rogers and Danny Bulanati. And they did a wonderful job. We talked about that very much in depth. Now, they were working from the exact same script and the exact same plot that Todd was. When Marvel realized, hey, we've got an entire issue of a comic book drawn by probably the biggest name in comic book art next to Jim Lee in the last 20 or 30 years, sitting in the vaults. Maybe we should publish that and make a bunch of money. So they went and they got a great new cover drawn by Phil Gosier and actual friend of the show, Scott Koblish. And they got them to draw a McFarlane homage to the cover of Spider-Man #1, which is Snake Eyes kind of perched on a ledge and he's overlooking some various things. It's funny because Snake Eyes really isn't in this issue, but it's a great idea for a cover and it makes perfect sense. So they called it the G.I. Joe Special #1. And it says it was published in October of 1987, which is wild because the other one seemingly was published in just a few months later. So this came, I was reading Joe. I absolutely do not remember seeing this on the stands, but I'm glad they did it. And this gives us a really cool insight into the creative process. I don't have any special insight. I just have kind of a comparative eye. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of compare the two pages back to back. We're not going to go through the you were saying stuff because we did all that last week. All that's the same. We're kind of not even going to get into the plot that much. So this could be a real quick episode. But we're going to look at the results and kind of the differences between the Marshall Rogers version and the McFarlane version and see, kind of come to a verdict at the end of it. Before we do that, though, I want to urge you guys, all of you guys, to listen to our sponsor podcast, Movies and a Meal. Listeners, I know what you need in your life. You need more podcasts. And you also love movies. So why not do a podcast that's about not one movie. It's about not two movies. It's about 3 movies and a meal. I'm talking the Movies and a Meal podcast. This show is great. It's brought to you by Keith, Brad, and Ben. And each week they bring a new movie to the table, which they all discuss as a group. And it's not, your highfalutin movies. It's What We Do in the Shadows, The Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and Out of Sight. It's Bad Education, Ghost Rider, and A View to a Kill. It's X-Men Last Stand, Queen Sugar, The Mandalorian, and Major League 2. They are a lot of fun to listen to. You guys know Ben. It's our friend Ben Pensarga. He was a guest on Joe and Joe. In fact, Ben was the very first remote guest that I ever had on this podcast, so he's always got a special place in my heart. I'm really digging this. I just started listening to it last week. It is a lot of fun. They bring a guest in. The guest, I listened to their Heathers episode. They were joined by Kelly, and she went in depth on her favorite movie, which was Heathers, and it made me want to go watch Heathers to watch with them. I really dig it. So guys, find them out there at Movies and a Meal, Twitter, Instagram. Their website is moviesandameal.podbean.com. They put out 1 episode a week. Give them a listen, guys. Support them. Let them know Joe on Joe sent you. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. It is quite entertaining. And now back to the show. And we're back. So, G.I. Joe Special #1. This cover we've talked about before. Phil Gosier and Scott Koblish. Scott Koblish, by the way, one of the nicest guys in comics. If we ever have conventions again, he's always there. stop by and say hi. It is. It's Spider-Man crouched, or Spider-Man. It's Snake Eyes crouched like Spider-Man, and it's a good looking cover. I like it. I think it works perfect. And they even did a really, really fun thing with the lighting on it, to where it looks like the lighting actually makes the look of the webs of Spider-Man's costumes. You know, Spider-Man's got the red costume with the black webbing. The way that the lights are seemingly shining on Snake Eyes here makes him look like he's in a Spider-Man outfit. It's awesome. Last I looked, this book goes for over $100. I think one just the other day went for about, it was actually it was from eBay Europe, and went for about $160 or something like that. So it's definitely a comic that I want to get in my collection. It was off my radar, again, I said last issue, because I thought it was just a reprint of 60. I didn't realize that it was always a lost issue. And I think that's really, really cool. So besides just having a sweet cover, it actually is lost issue. Now, luckily, it was reprinted in the IDW Complete Collection Volume 7. So that's what we're using to base this off of. So I've got my actual old school vintage 61 here, and my real G.I. Joe 61. This was the one that I bought off the stand. So it's been red, it's beat up. I see some dog ears on the corner, but I love it. And we've got the sweet new IDW vintage thing. So let's get into it. Page 1. Beginnings and endings. So they both start with the same splash page, same dialogue and everything, and a pretty similar setup. Interestingly, though, I think one of the things that I think of when I think of McFarlane is an exaggeration of form, or like form of the figures. Like, it's such a focus on the superhero form, and so the camera usually goes a little closer, and the characters are a little more exaggerated. Because we're not necessarily setting a scene as we are showcasing the drawing of that character in the moment. So that typically, to paint with broad strokes, that typically means the camera's a little closer on the characters than it might be from some artists. You know, they might start the camera a little further out to give you a picture of the room. Strangely enough, this first page is reversed. Marshall Rogers, his camera actually is in closer, and his figures of, it's Hawk talking to Stalker and the guys, his figures take up more of the frame. Todd does more of the room building. And so we do get a better sense of where they're at than we do in the Marshall Rogers one, which is, I was surprised to see that. We're also getting a projector screen of what their mission is. And I'm not a fan of this, the way it's drawn here, because it's not really evident what's going on. So the action of what's happening in the scene, I think, is more clear in the Marshall Rogers version. And we'll just use that shorthand. We'll use the Rogers version versus the McFarlane version, even though it is a full creative different team. Before we go any further, of course, Larry Hama script, Todd McFarlane pencils, Nelson on inks. He's a talent. Vicky Williams did the lettering for this. Chi did the colors, or Shy did the colors. I'm not sure how they pronounce that. And Mike Lackey was the editor, and Carl Potts was editor-in-chief. And that is all different from what was on the regular 61. And I wonder if that is kind of the post-production editorial group. I imagine it is. I imagine that's kind of the team that came into, hey, we got this issue, clean it up, get it ready for editorial, color it and all that stuff, and get ready for publication. So that's why some of those names are different than the regular G.I. Joe squad. So while McFarlane's splash gives us a better kind of concept of where these guys are, which is a really, really dingy rundown meeting room, which I like. I'm not keen on the colors on it because it's really hard to tell what's going on. I wish it was a little brighter. And I guess it's supposed to be a projector light that's kind of illuminating the room. The light angle is just all wrong. And then the picture of the guy being escorted by the soldiers in that image, it doesn't feel very flat. It actually feels like that guy's in the room. It doesn't feel like it's being projected against a flat wall. So the Marshall Rogers version, where we actually don't see what they're looking at, but we do clearly see that they're standing in a projector image, and he's pointing to something on the screen, even though it's actually giving us less information. I kind of like the Rogers version better.
Yo, Joe!
And I just had this thought, and for no other reason than why not? We're doing a podcast, something to do. I'm gonna keep score. I'll put a mark next to which ones I prefer, Rogers or McFarlane, and when we get to the end, we'll tally them up, and just to see if there's any clear winner, or see if it's kind of even done. I'll try to be as fair, as equitable as possible. So now we've got it's the rundown of what the mission is. And in the Marshall version, we're getting that image of him being escorted by the guards that was included in the previous page for McFarlane. And then we get a close-up of the 4 dudes, then a close-up of their contact. We're getting it, in this case, we're getting it out of order. So we already saw the guy that was kidnapped in the previous page, so we're going straight to who their contact is. The only real close-up of the guys is this bottom quarter panel, and these panels are all much bigger. So now this is where we get to that that thing I was talking about with McFarlane pencils, and just kind of, I would say, the image aesthetic is where the characters take up more space in the panel. It's more about showing those dudes than it is about showing telling the story, we'll say. So I kind of, and we've got it's a medium shot, and it shows all 4 of them. But it doesn't really give them an intro like the Rogers stuff does, and it ends with a close up on Hawk, very much like the Rogers one. I'm gonna give it to the Rogers one because I think it kind of tells the story a little clearer, and it sets the story up as the star here, instead of kind of unfocused images of the Joes. That's where I land on that.
Yo, Joe!
And meanwhile, over in Denver, they both start pretty similar, opening on Fred's garage. McFarlane's actually gives a little bit more of the scene, which is good. Close up on the gang in the garage. Billy gets upset and he walks away. He's gonna find his own life. And Fred 7 stops Billy with a handgun. Now, I like the McFarlane pages just fine, and I really like the Rogers pages, but I think the big difference is, so Rogers gives us 6 panels total, and McFarlane gives us 4. So there's more text included in each panel, and so that means there's less moments in between those panels where we can kind of give a breather and take emotional breaks with what's happening in the action. And if you guys recall, this is actually a really emotional page. This is when Billy tells his dad and all the other, and Raptor, of course, that he's done with them, that he's found his own peace and everything. I don't see that in the McFarlane pages. I see anger in Billy. I see petulance, the way he's drawing him. He also gave him some really, really short shorts. But I see anger and petulance. I don't see the inner peace that I do see in the Marshall Rogers one. Right before Fred pulls his gun on him, Billy's head is down, and he says, "You can play your little tragedies without me. I'm going to find my own life." In the Rogers version, that is played very somberly, and Billy is resigned to this, that he's leaving behind these guys to probably kill themselves or get themselves killed, and he's leaving. In the McFarlane version, he's storming out. The only thing missing is that the script doesn't have an exclamation mark after "find my own life." The exclamation mark would actually fit to the character that Todd drew, because that Billy is very angry and he's storming out. The action of Fred kind of grabbing him and putting a pistol on him, that's fun. Billy they both look a little cartoony, but that's McFarlane style. I'm going to try to stay away from like style choices versus storytelling choices. Because I think it's more important that the storytelling stuff. So I got to say, Marshall Rogers, you get a 3rd.
Yo, Joe!
Now we get some good ninja action. I like this a lot. Looking at the McFarlane page, he knocks the gun out of his hand. Fred looks, in both versions, Fred looks frightened. We get to see Billy's face in the McFarlane version. And I like that. I actually like that better than the Rogers one. The Rogers one, we see the back of Billy's head, so we don't really know what he's looking like. The McFarlane version, I would say he looks determined. I wouldn't say it's great detailed, but it is determined. And in the "I'm going to kick you in the face" pose, I like the McFarlane stuff a little better. The Rogers stuff looks great, but the McFarlane stuff has a lot of action to it. Billy is absolutely springing off the ground, and he does like a sweet double kick even. So where in the Rogers version, he kicks Fred, and then he also kicks Raptor. McFarlane found a way to have him kick both of them. He knees Fred in the face, and he kicks Raptor, kicks the whistle out of Raptor's hand in just 2 panels instead of 3. So I like that. So that action so far, 2/3 of the page, I think, goes to McFarlane. And now we get to the end, and McFarlane's he's still angry. He's still too much, he's still angry and not at place, which goes against that bad karma line about too much bad karma generated by striking someone as pathetic as you. He's yelling at Raptor. In the Rogers version, he's contemplative about it. But to be fair, 2/3 of this page is awesome. So I'm going to give this one to McFarlane, even though I do think tonally, I prefer the Rogers page better. So now we go to the next page.
Yo, Joe!
And of course, since we're actually looking at the real comics, we get one of the Mickey Mouse Oreo commercials, which was awesome. But in the actual comic page, it's Cobra Commander, and he's pulling a gun on Billy. Billy looks shocked, and Billy gets in his face. And again, it's a matter of tone. Same dialogue, but in the McFarlane, he's not screaming. There's no exclamation mark, but it's they actually draw the word wrong in a very, very bubbly, cartoony way, like wrong. Like he's saying wrong. And then he gives them he gives those guys the hand too, and I'm gonna storm out of this place. And it just works better in the Rogers version. Everyone looks more defeated. Now, if you remember last week when we got to this page, I talked about how the subtle shifting of the camera goes from that top panel to that bottom panel. It shifts just ever slightly over to the doorway to follow Billy and show us that Cobra Commander lowers his gun and is sad. And you don't get any of that subtlety in the McFarlane stuff. I would also say he's got Cobra Commander like fully cropped in that bottom panel. I think that's far be it from, I don't mean to critique art, but if you look at that bottom panel, I think he would have been better served to move Cobra Commander down a little bit and crop him a little further up the leg instead of making him look like he's standing completely on the bottom of that panel. It's just a little awkward. That's one of those art lessons that you always hear editors talk about when they show rookies. Now, a rookie Todd McFarlane comes in and has that. I'm not kicking him out of bed. You know what I mean? But that's one subtle difference. I like this open panel that McFarlane does. I think that's really cool. I think that really works. The shakes on Cobra Commander's gun shows that Cobra Commander is kind of hesitating. But for overall impact, I gotta go Rogers. I gotta go Rogers on this one for overall impact, just because it just plays Billy. The whole scene just plays Billy's emotions so well, and his emotion being that of serenity, not of anger and petulance.
Yo, Joe!
So now we're back in downtown Barovia. Very similar. He's got that crazy racist page where everyone's saying crazy racist stuff to Stalker, and he's just taking it because he's got a job to do. But very similar. There's to be honest, there's really not much of a difference here. It just shows Stalker going up the stairs, getting called down the hallway once again, with not in disguise by Snowjob. So yeah. So I'll give you this one because there's absolutely nothing wrong with this stuff. He's got a lot of long shots. It sets the stage. It gives us a good feel for the city, for the hotel that they're in. I think it works perfectly fine. So. We'll use baseball terms, guys, of like tie goes to the runner.
Yo, Joe!
So everyone's meeting in this room. I like the McFarlane picture better. The McFarlane picture that we got here is a bigger. It's Stalker entering this hotel room where all the guys are hanging out, and the McFarlane picture is actually pulled back further, and it's a bigger shot of the room. I remember, I think I even talked about it in last week's episode, where this initial image is really close and it's really crammed up. So it's more claustrophobic on these guys, which works, and it's certainly not bad, and it evokes a mood. But the McFarlane one really shows that, they're at a nice hotel and, they just got everything set up. And sure enough, they are in there. They're in their Joe uniforms, though. And that's the one thing that I will deduct Todd for on this one is they shouldn't have been in their Joe uniforms. They were supposed to all be in disguise. And yet you've got Quick Kick, shirtless Quick Kick. Stalker is still in disguise. Snow Job is literally in his snow gear at this moment. Now, maybe this comes into play. If you remember in the regular issue, towards the end, they get their clothes tore up, and underneath it are their G.I. Joe outfits. So maybe that's what he's setting up here. So I'm going to give him a little bit of slack on that. Floor plan, the map that they use. Todd McFarlane's is better. It's more detailed. Again, I have a feeling that's because it was not rushed as much as maybe the other one might have been. But the result is, let's just go with what's on the page. The floor plan absolutely looks better. The reproduction on like the original plans in this bottom left panel, I think that's a repro problem because it's way too dark to be visible. I'd love to get my hands on an original copy of this because a lot of these colors, and specifically the purples in this IDW reprint, are just so deep and they're really hard to see against the blacks. So I'm going to assume that that's a reproduction error. But Todd actually manages to squeeze an extra panel out of this page. So I give this page to Todd McFarlane, guys. So right now we're running 4 Rogers, 3 McFarlane.
Yo, Joe!
Gotta be honest, it's a closer race than I thought it would be. And so now on this page, we're actually we're seeing the same kind of repro problem with the coloring on this image. This is supposed to be an image of the like the main building that they're breaking into, like the exterior of it. And it's just really hard to see in this reproduction. So I'm not going to default anyone for that. It's much easier to see on the Marshall Rogers version. But Todd actually manages to squeeze in, like Outback looking like staring intently at you over the image as they're showing it to Stalker, which is funny because like, okay, yeah, Outback's there. Sure. We do get a nice, group shot of the guys just hanging out. Stalker and Quick Kick sharing a little thumbs up. And then we go to the Spigoli showing them the weapons. So the biggest difference between these two pages is all about focus and storytelling. I'm not sure, to be honest, as I'm going to talk myself through this, I don't know which one I like more. So the McFarlane one definitely is relying on, I can draw these guys, these characters. And it's not relying on, I can draw what would be insert shots in a movie. The Marshall Rogers page is all insert shots. It's all relaying information to the readers, not just verbally, but also visually. This is the building they're going to. Here's what the docks are going to look like with these soldiers guarding it. Then we get a close-up of Stalker kind of, filling us in. And then here's a close-up of the weapons the Joes are going to be using to go on this mission. That isn't necessarily the focus of this page. The McFarlane page, is these 4 guys in a room talking about a plan, and there happens to be stuff around it. It's subtle, but by including all these drawings of the Joes just hanging out and, for no real, like there's like Quick Kicks in the middle panel instead of the focus being, the armed guard, right? Quick Kicks in the panel where Stalker tells us what the deal is, talking about like the final plans for it. Why Quick Kicks in the background, I don't know. Like there's no reason for him to be there. So it distracts from the importance of Stalker. So it's really subtle. It's not terrible. It's not a terrible choice. And it is putting form over function. And I like function. So I'm going to give it to Marshall Rogers, everybody. It's 5-3, Rogers to McFarlane.
Yo, Joe!
Now, ninja action. This page is pretty similar for both. We'll go back to Denver, and this is when Billy goes back to that dojo to meet the blind master and Jinx. We finally get Jinx's name. She's hanging from the ceiling. She flips down. The Rogers version definitely makes her look more like a woman, like a young adult, but still a woman. The McFarlane version, she looks like a child. She looks like a teenager. And I don't know what instructions they gave her. She was a brand new character, so it's not like she had a lot of history, and actually he drew the previous issue anyway, so who knows what instructions he was given here. So I'm not going to fault him for that, but I do prefer the Rogers version because she does seem more like a mentor type to Billy. And in the McFarlane version, I mean, she's drawn shorter than Billy in that final picture. That I'm not cool with, because it sets up a weird, it's a weird dynamic. And in the Rogers version, she's pretty close to his height, but she actually looks like to be about an inch or two taller than Billy. If you look at their eye levels in that final panel, the Rogers panel gives more import to those guys. McFarlane focuses on the acrobatics of Jinx and then kind of gives us a pullback on them talking, instead of, like, he's talking about betraying his father. I want to see the solemnity of that moment. I want to see him looking at her eyes saying, I won't betray my father. That is as it should be. Instead, what we get is a very far pulled back camera. And with the way his arms are out, he's kind of like, I'm not going to betray my father. But top row, I like McFarlane's panel with the long shadows and the dojo door. I like that. I also like the Rogers one, but I think the McFarlane one is great. It gives a lot of spookiness to it. Rogers, you can clearly see that Jinx is hanging from the rooftops. McFarlane looks like she's diving from the rooftops. So I gotta go Marshall Rogers on this, guys. It's almost a nothing page, but it's not. But it's almost a nothing page. But I think Rogers makes the right storytelling choices.
Yo, Joe!
Now, literally across the street. I love that he's like, I'm leaving, and they're not happy about him leaving, but he really just goes across the street. That's always made me chuckle. So back over at Fred's garage, I like that McFarlane starts with an establishing shot. I would say it's not necessary because we already had one and we know where Fred's garage is. But you're not gonna hear me complain about an establishing shot, especially from an image, an image era artist. So that's for sure. Him showing Cobra Commander stripping off the armor is really effective here. The Rogers version, it looks like all we're really getting is the gauntlets torn off. In the McFarlane version, it's like it's not just the gauntlet. It looks like he's got like a lot of the chest piece taken off. Like he's really stripping down in this. I really dig it. The Raptor close up in McFarlane is way cooler than the Raptor close up on the Rogers one. The Rogers one looks like a sketch head profile, and I have a feeling that we talked about this last week. There was a few panels throughout this that really felt like it was, we have 24 hours to make this comic. Let's do the best we can. But the McFarlane one looks like a human wearing a dead bird on his head. I like that a lot. And you get more emotion from Cobra Commander in the McFarlane version. He's not just putting the headgear down; he's throwing it down. He's finally seen the light. He's done with it. So I got to give this page to Todd McFarlane, guys. So we're at 6-4.
Yo, Joe!
5 panels in the Rogers, 4 panels in the McFarlane. It is a difference of a beat, but it's important. Because in the Rogers one, let's walk through our beats. Tosses the gear down, which we showed he actually tossed it down in the previous page. But we get a toss down, then we get a gun pickup, then we get a shoot, then we get a moment of silence as the tension kind of deflates, and then we get Fred picking up the Cobra Commander helmet. With one less panel, you got one less beat. So we already had the toss down of the thing, so it actually starts in the Rogers version, that whole scene carries its own tension from start to finish. You could take that page and you could hand it to someone and they would get everything that's happening here. In the McFarlane version, because he already threw down his armor on the previous page, if you just looked at this page, all you see is a man walking out. You don't see a man walking out and abandoning something. You may not exactly understand what the armor is, but in the Rogers version, you see him throwing something down. He's done with something, and he's walking out of the room. In this case, he's just walking out of the room. The gunshot, very similar. The McFarlane version's as explosive as the Rogers one. I think they're both great. There's a sense of pride in the McFarlane one on Fred's face I don't like. And then also in the final panel, there's a smile on Fred's face. It makes me think that he's always been planning this. In the Rogers version, he's not happy about it. You know, Fred just knows that there needs to be a Cobra Commander. So he's making this as he goes. In the McFarlane one, that smile, the way he's proudly hanging over it, it feels like this was part of his plan the whole time. And I'm not here for that. I mean, it looks, although Todd's drawing of this, I know the Cobra Commander's helmet has always been, we'll use the word problematic. And I get that. But as we covered last issue, when he drew that rocket ship was terrible. It's straight terrible. It just really was. And his drawing of Cobra Commander's helmet here is not good. So, it's just one beat off, and that's not unintentional. I got to give it to Marshall Rogers. I love that page so much. I think that page is just it's a fine execution of storytelling, the Marshall Rogers version. So Marshall Rogers.
Yo, Joe!
So now the rest of the book is all Barovian action. And, Todd starts with some nice establishing shots. Again, the colors on this reproduction are rough, so it's actually hard to see everything. But, they show up. They're hiding in the garbage truck. I like it a lot. I think that's funny. The Rogers version, the angle they chose to show us of the dock matches the angle of the photo that we saw earlier, which I think is very cool. But that aside, I think the McFarlane one gives us a better picture of what that area looks like. It's just a different camera angle. It's from a little further back, and we get a different sense of it. I like the lighting in the Rogers version more, and that would be the coloring on it, but the lighting being that like there's a local spotlight that's illuminating just an area of it. That seems to be missing in the McFarlane one. Like it's all shadow in that, so I'm not super keen on that. Rogers' characters just take it more seriously, and it's evidenced in Outback's face that they draw. He's just, and also, let's be clear here, McFarlane draws Outback with a an Irish or Scottish hat on, like a kilty hat, and that's not what Rogers has him wearing. Rogers has him wearing a knit cap like you'd wear on an assault mission like this. So he just looks more serious in the Marshall Rogers version. But it's the same action. Door opens, knocks the guy out. They all get out of the truck, and as the Joes go inside. So it's very similar action. I'd say Ty goes to the runner, so we'll give that to McFarlane.
Yo, Joe!
McFarlane has like Quick Kick swinging in the room like Batman for no real reason other than to draw him swinging into a room. On the Rogers one, it's definitive Stalker's knocking a guard out, or knocking him on the head and putting a gun in his nose. In the McFarlane version, it's Snowjob that's putting the gun up the guy's nose. All right, actually, technically, I guess it could be Snowjob doing it in the first one too. We actually don't see who's behind the trigger. And yeah, in the second panel, it is Snowjob holding the guy. So let's assume that that's the same. That's consistent. But why is Quick Kick flying in? I don't know. But he is. He's also he does crack both guards with the nunchucks. I prefer the close up. You get to see like I like the tooth chip happening in the Marshall Rogers version. I also like the silent panel that we get in the Marshall Rogers version, because it's in that mid panel. They're both 5 panels, but they pace everything differently. So in that mid panel in the Rogers version, we do have the same dialogue where Quick Kick says, "I could take these guys out silently," but then they are smart enough to take the time to show us this really great, starkly shadowed panel where Quick Kick is quietly getting ready to assault these two dudes. And there's no dialogue in that panel, so that gives us a visual pause. Like we hold our breath during that moment, and then a whap whap of him, hitting him with the nunchucks. We don't get that pause in the way that McFarlane laid everything out. We actually have Quick Kick whispering to the guys above a staircase as he's 5 feet away from behind these two guards. So I gotta go Marshall Rogers on this. I think that Rogers shows restraint in that silent panel. It just absolutely shows restraint. Plus, anytime you can harken back to the silent issue, which I don't, whether you meant it or not, I think that type of panel there is a harken back to the silent issue. I think that's plus. So that's Marshall Rogers.
Yo, Joe!
Now, we're not even gonna play with this next page. Marshall Rogers wins this page hands down. I'm just gonna mark that in the books right now. This is that wonderful page with those 4 panels that flip you upside down and counterclockwise, and that's where everything goes wrong in this mission. Todd doesn't have that. Todd's got all the reveals, and they're going through the doors of the jail, and all the cells are empty. He's got all that same information being relayed, and Stalker, asking the guy for details and all that stuff. But he doesn't have those 4 panels in the middle, and you're not going to top that. So let's move on.
Yo, Joe!
Very similar top panel here. The 3 guys rather, yelling at the guard, figuring out what's up. The pacing is different. So in the Rogers one, you've got 6 panels total. And the guys talking is only the first panel, and they get right to it. A third down the page or quarter down the page, they get right to those guards finding them out. So you get the Auga mid-page, and then then you get some action happening. On the McFarlane one, he actually slows it down. It makes the Auga the moment of tension instead of the Auga propelling the page to the action, where the guys are busting through the door, and they're no time for finesse boys, blow away anything that gets in your way. So the Rogers page ends with this propelling forward of the guys breaking out action, and the McFarlane page ends with, we don't know what's going to happen next, we just know the alarm's been tripped. And that's important. That is important. Those are 2 different those are definitely 2 different energies that we're ending with. And I like them both. We're gonna say Ty goes to the runner. I'm not definitively gonna say McFarlane, but the choice to leave it on the Auga as your page break, I think that's as strong a choice as it is to propel the story forward. I'm going to see how he takes it to the next page, but for now, I'm going to give McFarlane that one.
Yo, Joe!
So now in the McFarlane one, he's got to play a little catch up here. So now they still got to break out, and that's what they're doing in the first few panels. They're still throwing the guard in the door. Remember, that's about 3 or 4 panels behind where Rogers already took us. By this point on the Rogers version, they're already back up to the top level, and they're in that waiting area, and they're already fighting with the machine guns. McFarlane has 3 panels, to get us to catch us up to where the top of the Rogers page even starts. So McFarlane's got some catch up to do. McFarlane's got a really wide shot in the middle that just has a lot of soldiers, man. There's just a lot. There's like there's literally, I'm not even joking, like 12 or 13 or 15 soldiers shooting at them, where Rogers seems more appropriate. Rogers is like, we've got 6 soldiers shooting at him, and it seems paced more evenly, where they started their ascent on the previous page. Halfway through this one, they get to the starting point of of this building where the mission started, and then it ends with them making their getaway. Todd has to accomplish that all in one page. He has to accomplish them leaving the jail cells, going up the stairs into that mid room, being faced by literally over a dozen guards, and then making their way out the door, which again, outside, there's just so many soldiers there. I gotta go Rogers, just because of the, not because of any execution issue here, because, there's some fun stuff. Them busting through the door is always exciting. But I got to go Rogers because it's got an evenness of the pace, which I personally prefer.
Yo, Joe!
So we got some car chase, both very similar. You know, you could see like in the notes, there must have been the same notes because there's a trolley car in both versions. This pickup truck they're driving gets bashed around pretty good. The Rogers one has the car barreling towards us. The McFarlane one actually has it barreling away from us, which is, I would say, not as impactful. I think the Rogers one, putting us in front of the action, is a little more exciting. Even at the very end of it, where we're still more where the direction that the truck is heading, and McFarlane puts his camera way above the city, which is a little more detached, a little more removed from it. It's not as personal. Where in the Rogers one, we could be a pedestrian on the street corner watching this. We could be someone seeing this car barreling towards us in that first panel, or in the last panel, on the kitty corner of where the action's happening. So, I gotta go Rogers on this.
Yo, Joe!
Now, this next page, we got 6 panels on the Rogers version, and only 4 on the McFarlane one, and I think it suffers for that. I think the Rogers one, having more panels, drags the suspense out a little bit longer, and it makes it more enjoyable. It builds to what the eventual end of this issue becomes. The McFarlane one is very fast. It's very, we got a roadblock. Oh, they get shot up. Oh, they drive down an alley. And then they actually have the wrong caption going to someone because he never drew in that final panel, because he didn't draw Spigu, their helper guy, their local helper guy. They actually have incorrectly a stalker saying Spigu's comments, which Spigu says, get out of the truck. I'll try to buy you some time. That's being attributed to Stalker, which is not right. So because of the way he drew the page and laid it out, we actually get an error. So that's kind of like a forced error. I'm going to give that to Marshall Rogers simply because of that. Had he drawn Spigu, you wouldn't have had to have that caption, that bubble going in the wrong place.
Yo, Joe!
And so now we've got the panel where Spigu is giving them a good luck Joe's, and he drives backwards into the waiting soldiers where they're eventually going to kill him and everything. So because that bit of action is moved, and because in the previous page we had the wrong dialogue, it comes across as him just ducking out on them, like, good luck, G.I. Joes, and him yelling Spigu as if he's literally abandoning them, which he's not, as you could tell later. But it just that subtle difference of having that word balloon not come from Spigu, and then it also being on a different page than the rest of the action. That moment, that decision of Spigu deciding to sacrifice himself, it doesn't pop for me. It doesn't pop for me in the McFarlane one. We also get, the McFarlane one is very action heavy. We get that whole panel where they're getting shot at. And at this point in time, remember the whole reason Spigu is sacrificing himself is so that they focus their fire on him and not the Joes. So in McFarlane, there's a whole panel where the Joes are getting shot up, and it actually resembles very much, it's the panel from the opening cover, the cover image. But that panel negates what Spigu is even doing. In the Rogers version, he doesn't have them getting shot at, and while it's not realistic, I'm sure that there would still be guards either technically just maybe missing the truck, and randomly shooting at the Joes, or actually bearing down on the Joes. By having the fire stop at our heroes and not having them be shot at this moment, it gives more credence and more weight to Spigu's sacrifice because all the attention is on him. McFarlane deflates that by having these guys still getting shot at, and it keeps them in the hero mode instead of giving the hero moment to Spigu. And I think that's really, really, really important, and a lesson that an editor should say and should point out that that's not great. So this is definitely a Marshall Rogers page.
Yo, Joe!
And, you know, we get Spiegel getting blown up. This is better than the Gulag. Very similar page. A good explosion. I like the Rogers explosion better because in the same page, as in the same explosion, the guys are getting buffeted by that, and that's actually when their clothes get torn in the issue 61. Remember how we said that they had their clothes on, their G.I. Joe clothes underneath their infiltration clothes? They get torn off in that explosion from Spigu's car, which is, getting shot at by a tank. So it's not as powerful here because Todd puts the explosion in a solitary panel, and then when we see the Joes, it's just a smoldering fire. So it doesn't have that big impact that the Rogers version had. And in the final panel, we're giving up the game a little bit in the McFarlane version because the camera is situated as such that we, the viewers, can clearly see on this page that Outback is not with them. That it's, if you can make out who it is, it's Quick Kick and Snow Job on the ground and Stalker hiding, and Outback is long gone. In the Joe's version, or in the Marshall Rogers version, yes, Outback is not seen in that picture. But with the camera angle being at the ground eye view, it doesn't tip us off at all as to what happened to Outback. So I'm going to go Marshall Rogers on this.
Yo, Joe!
And now here is the shot that Marshall Rogers gives us that Todd gave us in the previous panel. It's the same shot. It's that bird's eye view overhead of the alley, and it shows the sewer grate. So we can see, if you're paying attention, you see Stalker with his leg over the sewer, and then we find out later down on the page that that's where Outback is. But Todd already used that angle, so now we get a flat version, which in his renderings, by the way, of Quick Kick here, to be brutally honest, terrible. So he ruined that reveal by giving it to us on the previous page. So then here, which should have been a good first panel reveal for the turn the page flip, is kind of just neutered by having this mid close up of these three dudes, doughy looking dudes, just kind of going, "Hey, we give up." Meanwhile, in the Rogers version, that explosion tore their clothes off. We see that the two Joes are hurting on the ground, and they're unconscious. Really, they actually look quite unconscious. And then we get Stalker getting booted in the face and everything. And then when we cut to being in the sewers, similar. To be fair, the Rogers version I've always never really loved because Outback was so close to that sewer grate. Like the whole point for me, I was always like, the point of him going to the sewer is to actually get away, not just to hide there until they, what if they looked? Like once he gets in the sewers, he should run away. The McFarlane version of it, he is much further down. He's gone down a whole ladder. So it's like he's already starting to make his escape. But then the Rogers version drives the point home further that it's blood from the sewer grate dripping on him. So it's like neither one of them fully satisfy what I want out of that. But I think the Rogers version really works a whole lot better. So I got to go Marshall Rogers.
Yo, Joe!
And finally, the last page, pretty basic. They're both pretty much the same. It's, there's a TV broadcast. There's a bunch of Joes watching TV. Then, Hawk comes in and tells them, there's no rescue attempt, anyone, blah, 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 blah. I like the McFarlane one better of him, pointing his finger and you're going to be disowned. So I like that better. That's a little more, it's a little more powerful. I do think that the Rogers version is kind of like, I don't know how Hawk feels about it. In the McFarlane version, Hawk's adamant. Like, this is it, guys. Here's my order. The Hawk one just feels like he's desperate and he's got his hands tied. But I'll say this, the drawing of all the guys in the middle and gal, Scarlett's in there too. He spaces it so that it's a more enjoyable shot. It's more relaxed. Todd's got everyone squished into a panel. He's got less figures in there. Rogers found a way to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 if you count Polly, 11 if you count whoever the Joe is behind Roadblock's dialogue, which I can't tell. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so that's 11 dudes. And Todd barely squeezes in 7. Sorry. Todd barely squeezes in 7 guys. Plus points to Marshall Rogers for getting Polly up in the mix and Airborne, so I'm now Todd, to Todd's credit though, he does bring in, looks like Chuckles and Law and Order, which were used in his previous issue. So that makes sense. However, Rogers brings in Falcon. So that also was from that other issue. I'm saying Marshall Rogers. I don't even think this is a tie, guys. I think this last page is Marshall Rogers. Even though Todd has a stronger finish, I think that the emotion on that page, it's not about the finish. It's about that moment of the guys watching TV and just going, huh? And we get more reactions. We get more defeated. That's. Yeah, I think I gotta go Rogers. It's close though. This last page isn't easy for me. I gotta say it's very close. But I'm gonna go with Rogers, and you want to know why? Because Marshall Rogers drew Polly. So that's it, guys. We got 16 pages for Marshall Rogers and 6 pages for Todd McFarlane. That is a clear winner. I did not know where that was going to end going into this. I did not do this prior to recording. I really had no idea where this was going to end. So a clear winner that the Marshall Rogers version is superior to the Todd McFarlane version. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know, guys. Shoot me an email. Let me know on social at Joe and Joe Pod. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. Do you agree or disagree? Do you think it's blasphemy or do you think I'm spot on? I love it. Love talking comics with you guys, and I appreciate it. I hope you love it as much as I do. So remember, now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.